kids to help out with in certain areas, certain ways. And so all of that we're going to cover today right now, but then this is also still a standard Q&A. So if you have any sewing questions that aren't related to sewing with kids, please feel free to ask those as well. But so first off, when you are in your sewing room with your kids, however old they are, mine is almost 3, he turns 3 in a few days. It's good to keep them busy, keep them occupied, and keep them sort of interested in what you're doing. So right now, obviously, he's very interested in fabric, and this is actually his stash of fabric. So I know we talk a lot about, you know, having a fabric stash and maybe working your way through it. These little fat quarters here, these are actually all ones that he has picked out at the store, and this has been ways that I have kept him entertained, not only at the store while I'm shopping for fabric, and also in my sewing room. So fat quarters, as you know, if you're shopping maybe at your local quilt or fabric shop, or if you're shopping at like Joann's or someplace like that, they're fairly inexpensive, and they're also just super easy to grab off the shelf. So every time that we would be shopping, I would let him pick just 1 or 2 of them, and they would go into his little stash. So he got to play with them in the store, he got to pick out whatever colors he wants, and now he's currently occupied with taking the little stickers off of all of them. So this is his fabric. I'm probably never going to use it, but it's something that he gets to have in my sewing room that is his. So no matter what age you're starting your kids off in terms of sewing and being in your sewing room, give them something that is theirs. I like the stickers, yeah. Give them something that's theirs so they have ownership over something in your sewing room, so they want to come in and actually sew with you. So if you are wanting to do a project with your kids, maybe they're a little bit older and they are ready to actually sit down and start sewing with you, we have a bunch of projects coming up that are great for beginner sewers or teaching your kids to sew or just getting them interested and involved. And that's the Oh So Simple Challenge, and it starts on April 6th. So we'll have a link that you can click on so you can see the projects, the 7 projects, and you can put in your email and get signed up for that. You won't be able to download anything right away, but you can see this is just an example of one of the projects that we'll be doing. This is a super fun little pizza pouch. So when you click on the link and join, you're going to put in your email. Don't expect to download something right away if you're watching this live right now. You'll get an email on the 6th with the first project, and then they're going to come out after that. So it's not sort of an immediate download thing yet, unless you're watching this a little later and it is the 6th, and then you can download them. But just know that they're going to come out starting on the 6th, and it'll tell you what project is when, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so you'll know what's coming out and you can plan for what you want to do. But so I wanted to talk about the pizza pouch one and a couple of the other ones because I think those are great ones to get kids involved with for a couple reasons. One, even my 3-year-old, as soon as I showed him the picture, he immediately recognized it as a slice of pizza. So it's something that sort of is a little bit more to maybe their liking, something that they want to use and have. It's also something that is made with some felt fabric. So I know he's playing with all of these fat quarters, but I'm going to set them aside real quick so we can talk a little bit about felt, because felt is one of those fabrics that whether you are entertaining a small child in your sewing room with you or you want to get them started in working with fabric, felt is a great fabric because it is very easy to work with. You can machine sew or hand sew. It doesn't have to be finished in terms of your seams, and it comes in a lot of really fun colors as well as additional prints and things. Some have glitter, some have additional prints like stripes. You can find all sorts of fun things. With the pizza pouch, obviously you kind of want to pick colors that are similar to a piece of pizza or things that you're going to find on pizza. And so with that, you want to be picking out your solid colors of felt. With felt, and if you've ever watched me do any other video on felt before, I talk a lot about the different types of felt and the different thicknesses of felt, and that's something that I think is going to come in handy with this project and with any other felt projects that you want to work on with your kids. There are 2 main different types of felt. either craft felt versus premium felt, or you'll see 1 millimeter versus 2 millimeter, and that's just the thickness of felt. So if I pick a couple here in my stash that are the two different ones that I'm talking about, I can easily show you the difference. So here is a good example here. I'm trying to hold it up, and you can maybe see, if you can't see the difference in thickness, that the purple is a lot thicker than the white. If you're at the store or you are going through your stack of felt, you'll definitely be able to feel the difference in the two thicknesses of felt. The thicker felt holds up a little bit better. So while you might be really good about being careful with your felt and not overly stretching it when you're sewing, your kids might not be. So having that thicker felt of the craft felt, which is 100% acrylic, is going to make it so nothing stretches out of place as easily. So that's just a great thing to have when you are working with younger kids. Another thing that can help is using a different type of felt. So there are three main types of felt. There's the acrylic, which is craft felt, which you can find online anywhere these days. But then also, if you're out shopping locally and still able to do that, that's the one you're able to find at pretty much any craft or fabric store. But there's also wool felt, and then there's an acrylic wool blend. So these little squares here, these are acrylic wool blends, and they're a little bit stiffer. So these maybe will work really good for if you want to personalize your pizza pouch. So again, we showed that picture a little earlier. If you're just catching up with us now, go ahead and click the link so you can see these really cute projects. But it's obviously a slice of pizza that has some pepperonis on it, and it's using a fun reverse applique technique, exposing some fabric underneath. But if you have more than one child, or you're sewing with multiple kids, maybe every kid wants to have their pizza pouch be a little bit different. So while you can start out with your main pepperoni slice, it might be fun to have some little stiff pieces of felt like this and cut out additional toppings and let them really sort of personalize their own pouch so that each one is a little bit different. So whatever those toppings might be, you can easily cut them out of felt. If you have really little kids like mine, who's already lost interest and ran away, you can turn it into a no-sew project and use just a little bit of glue and glue that felt in place. You can have them, position where they want it, and then you sew it. Or of course, if yours is a little bit older, then they can sew it as well. So that is the wool acrylic blend. Or of course, there is 100% wool felt, like these pieces here. This is very, very thick, very sturdy in terms of felt compared to the other two. So again, if you want something that's going to hold up really, really well, then you may want to, since we're a lot of us shopping online nowadays anyway, you may want to do that, get some wool felt. Still comes in usually the same sizes, those 9 by 12 or 8.5 by 11 sheets, or you can find it in much bigger pieces, or even some smaller, narrower pieces. So just, depending on what you're making, you can get different sizes to fit whatever you're making. So a question here about what is the best age for these projects, and I'm gonna give it an example of, say, anywhere between 6 to 9, but that's gonna depend on your comfort level in terms of teaching your kids and your kids' interest in sewing. So my son is pretty much grown up in my sewing room with me, and he, when he's not distracted by other things, will actually sit and help me put pins in fabric. He'll sit on my lap, and as I sew, he'll take pins out when I sew up to them. So he's really engaged and would really want to sort of make some of these projects with me. So I'm not going to say that every 3-year-old is going to want to do that, but I think right around 7, 8, 9, that's a really good age to get them involved in sewing and start letting them do more of the actual sewing process versus just watching you do it. So the more things that you can have them do, I think is going to make them more interested in it, and that's going to actually keep them engaged. And then, of course, making a project that they get to use or personalize. So again, adding additional toppings to your pizza pouch, or just making something that they can use is going to make them want to continue sewing, because if they only are sewing what you want to sew, then they might be like, well, this isn't fun because I don't get to use any of these things. So try and keep them involved as much as possible. Mary says that she started sewing at 7 or 8 years old and just started teaching her granddaughter, who is 8. Started by showing her how to thread the machine and sew straight lines, and now she's sewing pillows for her youngest cousins and having fun. That is awesome. I love that. I'm pretty sure I was right around that same age when my mom taught me how to sew as well, and I do remember getting to sit on the counter and watch as she cut out pattern pieces. I may have gotten to help with pins, and then I remember being so little that I couldn't even reach the foot pedal. But you know, back in the day, she had one of those step-up boxes for workout videos, and I remember being able to put the sewing pedal on that to be able to reach it. So any way you can accommodate them so that they can also be part of the sewing process. A great thing too about a lot of machines these days are that they are very computerized, which some people like and some people don't. With this one, so I have the Applique 980Q, and it has an automatic threader, which a lot of machines do, but I can thread the thread through the thread path and get it ready, and then he knows what button to push that will then thread the machine. And just the fact that when he pushes the button, something happens, that kind of gets him excited about the machine. So he's not actually sewing anything, but he has, you know, threaded the needle for me. Another thing with this machine is that it has a separate motor for winding the bobbin, and it's on the side, and he knows how to do that part too. So he knows how to put the bobbin on. I have to do the thread path because he's not quite there yet. But then once it's on, it's just a touch screen with a play arrow. So very recognizable thing for pretty much any young kid these days because they've seen it on a phone or an iPad. But he's able to just hit the button to start it winding the bobbin. And again, it's something where he only has to press one button, but the machine takes over and does something, and that gets him excited about using the machine and doing something in the sewing room. And it's a question here. Hi, Jenna. So applique is really fun for your little ones. They get a chance to draw something and we get to create it together. Yes, I absolutely love that. So a great thing to do for applique. That's even a fun thing to do with embroidery as well. So if you are someone who likes to embroider, you can have your kids actually draw out a design of some kind and then you do the stitching around it. You can do that on your machine, or yes, you can have them draw any kind of drawing that they want, and then you can turn that into some kind of applique. I know I talk a lot about felt because I really like felt, but felt is a great thing to applique with because you can just put that right on top. You don't have to worry about doing turned edge or anything or worrying about it ravel, and you can do some really easy big hand stitching that depending on the age of your children they can get involved in as well. So yes, definitely felt and definitely applique is really fun to do with your kids. Hi Jacqueline, are some felts easier to work with? Yes and no. So I feel like across the board felt is just easy to work with compared to certain other fabrics in terms of it cuts very easily, it sews very easily, it doesn't ravel, doesn't require seam finishes. What I'm going to say is easier about it to work with for just everybody, and also bringing this back around to in terms of working with kids. Again, that wool felt or that 2mm or premium felt, that thicker felt is going to be a little bit easier to work with because it's not going to stretch out of place as much. And by what I mean by that is, so here's a piece of the 1mm or craft felt that I'm going to sacrifice because I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when it stretches out of place. So if you are trying to sew something and it's just not quite going, or maybe you're letting your kids cut something out and they're kind of pulling it as they cut, the more you pull on felt, so you can see I just pulled just very, very, I mean hardly any pressure at all. And you can see that I have made this edge wavy. That's never ever going to go back to normal. Like you can't press that out. It'll never go back flat. So the thinner the felt, the easier it is to distort. So that's why I would recommend that thicker felt or that wool felt because it's just a little bit hardier. Also, in terms of felt, I did mention that it comes in, you know, different prints and different things. Some have glitter. Anytime there's something added to the felt, so I can see this one has glitter. So glitter makes it a little bit stiffer because there's all that adhesive that holds that glitter on there. that makes this one a little bit stiffer and harder to sew through, harder to cut out. There's sticky back felt and there's actual stiffened felt. Both of those are a little bit harder to work with because, again, they have something added to them, whether that's that adhesive or things like that. So just your regular plain colored thicker premium felt or wool felt would be the easiest of all the felts to work with. Your boys have been able to cut out and sew their pants and shorts since they were 7 years old. That is awesome, Brenda. I think that's amazing because I think lots of people, adults, and people who have been sewing for 20, 30 years avoid pants and shorts because I feel like they are some of the hardest things to sew. So the fact that they want to do that is great. A fun thing that you can do too, if you want to be sewing your kids' clothes, so pants, shorts, shirts, things like that. Hey, come here. Is that because kids outgrow them so quickly, and you're constantly buying new things, you know, you can always take, say, an old shirt, one that they might be wearing that's a little bit too small, lay that down and you can trace that and use that as a pattern. So he is growing like a weed lately and outgrowing things super quickly. So I could take this t-shirt that he's wearing, simply lay it out flat on whatever fabric that I want to make him a shirt from, trace it, and then rather than just cutting out, say, 1/2 inch seam allowances on the outside edge or whatever it is that I want to be using, I can add an extra inch and sort of make that a little bit bigger. And so now I have made him new clothes, made them bigger, and he maybe even got to help with the process. So I think that's amazing. They're sewing pants and shorts. That's awesome. You remember your grandfather teaching you sewing and sewing cards, and your neighbor had a little touch and sew machine. Yeah, so that's a great thing too. So obviously I mentioned that this is the machine that I am using and that I let him do little things with, but they do make more beginner friendly machines. The very first machine that I purchased on my own was a very, very basic Brother model machine. That would be a great, anything that's sort of a basic or just a straight stitch machine is a great one to let kids start practicing on. You don't have to worry about them maybe touching a bunch of buttons and messing anything up that you don't know how to fix, because all it is, you know, a straight stitch kind of thing. And they do even make machines specifically for kids. I think that they sew at lower speeds too. So if the speed of the machine, even at the lowest speed setting, is something that maybe scares you a little bit, try and find one of those machines that are meant for kids. And then the sewing cards part, I like that a lot too, because that's something that I have talked about in other live events I've done with talking about working with kids, is that you can sew through paper. So, excuse me, this is something you can do to practice sewing techniques, and also make something as well. So if you want to teach your kids how to sew a straight line, how to practice lining that presser foot up along a line or along the edge of something, and then also how to practice sort of pivoting corners and things like that, you can do that by simply taking a maze that you've printed off. Maybe just Google search a free printable maze, and that is something that you can very easily teach them how to work their way through the maze, pivoting at the corners, things like that. And that is something that is going to be easy for them to do. Another thing, let me stand this back up, that can happen when you are working with kids in your sewing room. So normally when I'm sewing, I don't have this big light here that I have when I'm doing just live events that he just knocked over because there's cords. But this is back to very beginning when I talked about wanting to be safe in your sewing room, wanting them to be able to, you know, be comfortable doing things. Obviously, you're thinking about the machine, right? So you're thinking about keeping their hands away from the needles, away from the presser foot, safety, things like that. But cords are probably the biggest safety issue for kids, for yourself. If you're older, maybe, you know, they're just tripping hazards, things like that. So make sure you have cords either up away from the floor or where you won't trip over them, specifically iron cords, things like that. So if you have kids in your sewing room and they might be walking by, like that was just a light that tipped over, not a huge deal, but had that been something like a hot iron, it could have been, a bigger deal. So always be thinking about safety and how you're setting up your sewing room and things like that if you have little ones involved. Again, back to the sewing cards. We actually have a fun video on National Sewing Circle where one of our other instructors shows how to actually sew cards. So taking cardstock and using little scrap pieces of cotton fabric and felt fabric and sewing them onto actual paper and making little greeting cards. So that could be as something else that's really fun to do with your kids, especially if your kids are of the age where, I remember back in school for things like Valentine's Day and you did card exchanges, things like that. So if you have something where your kids can make something that they can give to other people, that is going to get them more interested in it as well. Cute. Also, we're now using pieces of felt to tuck in stuffed animals in bed. So, there's all sorts of uses for fabrics. So those are some really good tips on working with felt, working with kids in your sewing room, how to keep things safe, how to keep them interested, things like that. Hi, Brenda. So you learned on your grandmother's treadle machine. I think that is awesome. I personally have actually never used a treadle machine. I've seen them. I think I understand how they work, but I've never actually used them. I've always had some sort of pretty computerized machine, and I'm not sure that I would want to go back. So that is a fun skill to have and a fun thing that if you got to learn on that machine or you have the option to sew on older machines like that, I would take that if you're given that option, because I think it is something that would be really, really fun to do. Again, in terms of machines that you maybe want to use when you are working with younger kids, I mentioned there are machines geared towards younger kids. But I have to say, like, knowing my son now and how into certain things he is and not into in terms of interest level, this machine here is very computerized and very sort of high tech, I'm going to call it, in terms of anything that he would be doing for 10 years plus. But it has a touch screen on it, and he is very into playing with my phone. If somebody has an iPad or tablet, he wants to push all the buttons. So because of that, a machine like this may hold your kids' interest just a little bit more, because they can actually go through, and whether they're actually going to be sewing something or not, they can be going through looking at the different stitches, learning about the different types of stitches, seeing the different things that machines are capable of doing. And that's a little bit more interesting on a touch screen like what this machine has and what other machines have versus, if you have one of the older machines where, or even some of the newer machines still have them, but where the top flips up and there's just a bunch of pictures, that's not going to keep their interest maybe as much or as often. Hi, Andy. Your kids love to help make clothes for their stuffed animals and dolls. Yes, that was perfect. I think he's going to get to that point. Right now, there's about 30 pieces of felt that's tucking in this stuffed animal over here in the corner. So he's very interested in using fabric for things like that. So I think he's definitely going to get to that point. And that is a really good thing to do. You not only are teaching them how to construct clothes, the basics of clothing construction, but you're able to do it on a really small scale. So it's easier for them to complete start to finish. That's another thing. You want to make sure that your projects that you're doing with kids you're able to complete them fairly quickly. Because again, I mentioned, interest level and things. Like he's been in and out quite a few times. If your kid is older, they may be, more into sitting down and being a part of what you're teaching, what you're wanting to make. But if you can start to finish, complete something in an hour or two, that is sort of, I think, the best. So the quicker you can get that project done. And if that means that you do a lot of the prep work before you get them involved, maybe that's something that you want to do. So if you want to have all of the pieces already cut out or pressed, or things that you think they wouldn't be as interested in, or things, like cutting and pressing that you may not want them to actually do, then having that sort of prepped and ready beforehand so they can come in, do the fun part of actually getting stuff sewn, and then have that finished project to either use themselves or, you know, put on their stuffed animals right away. So that's a great idea. Again, clothes for their stuffed animals and dolls, I think is awesome. And I think is something that a lot of kids are going to enjoy. So clothes for stuffed animals, pants and shorts for yourself, clothes for yourself, all those are great projects. But again, if you just tuned in and you didn't see the first few minutes, we do have some other fun projects that you can make with your kids that is part of our Oh So Simple Sewing Challenge. It's going to start on April 6th. Talked a little bit about the pizza pouch that you can see here. And this is made with some felt fabric, which I've talked a lot about. So it's a great one for working with kids. It's also very easy to work with that fabric. There's a couple other projects as part of the Oh So Simple Challenge that are also made out of felt that you could also, you know, use for teaching moments with your younger kids. And then of course ones that use traditional cotton fabric and things like that that they may not be into in terms of using, like there's a coffee cozy, maybe they don't want to use that, but it's still a very easy project that you could teach them the basics of sewing with straight lines, right sides together, pinning, you know, basics of sewing, easy projects like that. There are a lot of them with this challenge that you will be able to do. So definitely click that link, sign up for the challenge. Again, it's not going to be an immediate download. That starts on April 6th. So on the 6th, you'll get an email that goes out that allows you to download that first project. So you'll be entering in your email to sign up for that. Or if you're not watching this live, you're watching this later, you'll be able to click right on that and download it. But I hope this kind of gives you some fun ideas of projects that you can do with your kids, ways that you can get them involved in your sewing room, and then of course just some basic tips on working with felt, because you're going to be working with it for a few of these projects for the Oh So Simple Challenge, and just ways that they can help out with felt projects and other fabric projects as well. So have fun in your sewing room if you're spending a lot more time sewing than you would have before. And then of course, if you have your kids with you, get them involved in your sewing room as much as you can as well. And we will have additional fun projects and lives coming out over the next few weeks as we all spend a bit more time in our sewing room.